Okay, sorry for the delay. We're back for some extra. And right, so as you can see, we don't have Brian here, so we're just going to have to play the individual shots this way because we don't have a placeholder for this particular setup, unfortunately.
So is this discrimination?
No, we'll just have us each up one at a time for this one. This is a configuration we've not planned for, so we can plan for it in case we need it in the future.
Okay,
so who wants to start?
Where do you want to start? Brian, do you want to start somewhere since you've been relegated to the outer darkness of deepest Devon?
Yes. Yeah, well, very happy to start. I just want to say thank you again to everybody that's supported David Noakes. And in the last couple of minutes, Mike has made the full little interview clip. It's 17 minutes, I think, or just about. That's now gone live on the UK Column website. And while we were, actually, I think while the news was live, there was another £500 donation went in. And let's just link David with the news. So David Scott, as I listened to that doctor talking about the problems they were having with cancer since the vaccines had come in, I couldn't help but think that if you had somebody in prison, well, David Scott was the motor of the organisation, if you like, but he had the qualified scientific professional people around him in order to do what he was doing with GC Math. But I could imagine that the powers that be, the MHRA, the pharmaceutical industry, wouldn't want any expertise, any expertise about cancer operating that was independent of pharmaceutical industry. So I could imagine that there are people who clearly would want to keep David Noakes in prison as we start to learn about some of these appalling side effects of vaccines. And the other bit was that I was fascinated that what the doctor was saying dovetailed in with the Zero Hedge article where Bill Gates was casually admitting that his wonder product stabbed into the arms of billions of people simply isn't performing as it was supposed to. It's mind-boggling, really.
David?
Yeah, the collapse of the mainstream COVID narrative is picking up pace. And we find this more and more, right? Because we're always second to every party, because I'm not saying that the government's a giant conspiracy, but the government's a giant conspiracy in that they will be well paid, well resourced, and they will form plans and they will implement the plans on the public. The public will not see this coming. The public are not initiating it. The public are having to react. And we've seen this pattern before. The initial narrative, the initial attack on the public consciousness is very strong. So for COVID, what's it been? If you don't put your mask on, you're selfish. If you don't get vaccinated, you're selfish. You're literally killing people. You're going to kill Granny, right? You are going to cause such harm. You're going to be a super spreader. So that's it, right? So anyone who sticks their head above the parapet when that initial volley is flying over stands a chance of being psychologically injured, which is what it's for. It's to force your head down. Duck and cover. It's to force people, to frighten people, to intimidate people so they don't think and they don't respond and they don't argue and they don't ask questions. And initially, it can be quite effective. And then what you will find is there will be some initial resistors who will say, well, This doesn't seem right to me. And they'll start to ask questions, and they'll start to do their own research, and they'll start to push back. And when they find that there's nothing substantiating this, they'll start to talk about it. And then the resistance starts to grow. And then the government line starts getting questioned. So what then happens is all of the initial attack lines by the government get essentially countered. You're killing Granny. No, your care home policy killed Granny. And in fact, the Liverpool Care Pathway killed Granny. I'm not doing anything to Granny because I'm well, and the whole myth of the asymptomatic super spreader is entirely spurious. So I'm not killing Granny. You're selfish. No, I'm not selfish because the vaccine and masks, etc., do nothing to protect anybody else, or me, actually. I'm no more of a risk to someone because I'm unvaccinated than someone who's vaccinated. Therefore, selfishness doesn't make any sense. You're being completely incoherent. Oh. Now, what we then find is underneath the initial attack lines, the government has no reserves. Right? It's, to use a military metaphor, it's like the Imperial Japanese Army. The Imperial Japanese Army would attack assuming success. And if you could hold on, they would become exhausted because they had no reserves. They didn't have enough ammo, they didn't have enough anything if it didn't just go their way. The government has no second line. They've got no reserves, intellectual reserves. So once you've defeated the initial attack line, you find there isn't anything else. And at that point, the government narrative collapses. And that's where they're at. I learned this in the name person fight, but I've seen it since in two or three other cases. We've now got through the initial bombardment, the heavy pounding, and we've survived that. We're on the move, and they have nothing left. Now, they've still got threats, intimidation, threats of arrest, threats of assorted coercion, but the intellectual case is gone. And if the intellectual case is gone, they have lost. It's now just a matter of time. So I'm very heartened by what I see, and particularly the Devi Sridhar thing. Devi was a cheerleader. Devi was a poster girl. Devi was wonderful. Devi was the last word in wisdom. Devi wrote a book with Chelsea Clinton. Devi was great.
But
Devi's run away.
And Devi was full of confidence.
And Devi was full of confidence, yes. And so was the Prime Minister of New Zealand, full of confidence. Now when the people are doing hackers outside the Parliament building, not so confident. The confidence is evaporated, as we reported last week in the call. And Devi's confidence is gone. Now, there will always be a few true believers, right? Nicola Sturgeon doesn't have the intellectual nous to realise the game's up. But she never has. Look at the independence campaign. Right? She doesn't analyse new situations well. So there'll always be a few, repeat offenders. But the game's up. Now, it's interesting to me what they do now, because do the government, do people like Sage, does the nudge unit have the ability to discern that the game is up? Do they have the strategic ability to make a strategic withdrawal?
I don't see any sign. Yeah, I don't see any sign of a strategic withdrawal, David. If anything, they're doubling down. But look, there's two main policy areas. One is climate, and one is COVID, and both of those have a key objective, which is basically the same, and that is behaviour change. And it's more or less the same behaviour change. that they're aiming for with both of those policies. Strangely, the coincidence is just amazing. But so climate change had failed decades ago. They're still flogging that dead horse, trying to get some momentum out of it. Then they unleashed COVID, the fake pandemic, and that didn't fly. But in the meantime, they were pushing forward with their Russia is the bad guys, Novichok, interference in elections, this kind of stuff, and now we're starting to rattle sabers. So is this another attempt to generate enough fear to create behaviour change, or to justify permanent lockdown and identity data collection and all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, that could be. The odd thing, climate change is an odd one, because the government can't survive ultimately if it loses the intellectual argument. But it can extend the campaign using cash, because they can print it and they can steal it. So what can you buy with cash? Well,
hold on. Just before you go on with that, David, I would even argue that's what quantitative easing was about. They intentionally inflated the money supply to provide themselves with the financial resources to pursue this rubbish.
Yes, I think that's a fair point.
Completely.
So what? Just so I hand over to Brian. What can you buy with? What can you buy with cash? You can buy the mainstream media. You can buy the professions. Professionals are always for sale. You can buy the charitable and third sector, and you can buy the people you directly employ. But you can't buy the rest of us, and you can't buy a coherent set of ideas, because they're not available for sale. They don't exist.
Right. Brian?
Yeah, I just wanted to add to it that the key weapon they've got is fear, isn't it? It's pressure. It's fear that they're using. They can't use truth, because they don't go near truth, because that destroys them. And they can't use, love and kindness, because that unites people, and that will cause them a problem. So the policy agenda is clearly based on fear and division. And I found it interesting in the news when David was talking about Texas there, and the description of the two different types of America. America is being ripped to pieces by exactly the same applied political psychology that's being used in this country. And this is where it gets so easy to identify not only what the attack is, but who's doing it, because we simply have to look at the people creating the policy to understand where the problem's coming from. And with COVID, I mean, there's no doubt what we're looking at. We're looking at a collusion between Bill Gates and his cronies and the big pharmaceuticals, the World Economic Forum, and the ultimately United Nations through the World Health Organization. So we can see now who we're up against. And what are they doing? They're trying to make people fearful. But when people are coming back at them, they are coming apart. And I think we're starting to watch Bill Gates come apart, because he doesn't know how to defend his own argument anymore. If he's drifting onto climate change when he was talking about vaccines and people are picking him up, this is really excellent. What we need, though, is more people to be sticking the...
Come back, Brian.
Unfortunately, the needs dispatching, and we've only got cocktail sticks. We need more people pushing in the cocktail sticks.
Okay, right. Look, we better move on with a couple of the bits that we didn't cover in the main news. Before we do, two questions. Why is Brian remote? Brian is remote because I'm as sick as a dog and I don't want to give it to him. So that's why Brian is remote. Second of all, Brian, the allegation is that your background is not very Devonian.
Oh my goodness, this is, people are not being have not been keeping up with Build Back Better, because a typical Devon village now looks exactly like the view out of my window. This is what progress is about. So I chose this one because I've been having green screen problems. And I've come to the conclusion this is due to the colour of my hair. And presumably it's becoming greyer, and this is interfering. So this is one background I could get working. But I assure you, this is what most of South Devon looks like under Build Back Better.
Yes. Okay, David, where do you want to start?
Right. Okay. McCrae assassination. Right. This was a major report in the Herald at the weekend. This has been a long-held view in Scottish nationalist circles. That this,
well, first of all, you better remind everybody
this,
who Willie McCrae was.
Yeah, so he was an SNP activist and leading lawyer. From Levy and McCrae, he's the McCrae in Levy and McCrae, the law firm that has a special place in the heart of the UK column because of certain interactions that we had with them in the past, when they were under a somewhat different management, to be fair. So the Herald reported, Neil Mackay in the Herald, that an SNP activist, Willie McCrae's death was state-sanctioned murder, says an ex-police officer. So this police officer is 80 years old. He knew McCrae. He was the local officer on the beat round that area. He knew him well, and he recounted, now as he's 80, a whole series of incidents that make him suspect foul play. So the first one was he was told that to not go around that particular area in his uniform because special branch were carrying out surveillance. He was then asked to essentially steal the keys of the McCrae office. And it was hinted that this would be good for his career. He also recounts other cases where surveillance was spotted by McCrae, and when suspicious movements of cars, etc., were reported, the registrations of the cars didn't show up on the database. And McCrae's explanation for this was Special Branch and MI5 don't register their cars with the DVLA. And then we had McCrae getting arrested on some trumped-up driving issue, so they could put him in a cell for a wee while, put all of his keys and everything in an envelope, and Special Branch would come and have a little look in the envelope and copy whatever they needed to copy. There was break-ins where only things that were removed were documents and diaries. There was break-ins where the response was to put in boxes, pile in huge amounts of documents out of the office, go and photocopy them and then return them. This was keeping the documents safe. So there was clearly a surveillance scheme going on. So the day he died, this police officer saw him, and he saw him leaving the office. And he said he patted his bag and says, "I've got them. Right, I've got some paperwork here. I've got them." And off he drove. And he said that there was the suspicious characters that he took to be Special Branch followed him. Now, what then happened was he was found in a remote Scottish moorland. His car was in the moorland, well off the road. And it was initially taken to be a car accident. He'd come off the road. He was taken very seriously injured to hospital, where they found a bullet in him, in his head or neck. And he later, a short while later, died. A search found a gun 60 feet from the car, and it was declared to be suicide. All of which seems less than utterly convincing. So the policeman says, following McRae's death, he stayed silent as he became fearful for his safety. I felt it would be wiser to keep quiet. I was scared for my life. I saw what happened. I was the last person to see McRae alive. I feared for my wife's life too. If I opened my mouth, I could have been done as well. I'm speaking out now, giving the full story of what I know, as I am 80 years old, and I'm sick of all the lies. It's a very interesting story.
So, the question then is, what's going to be done about it?
Well, Mike, I should have thought that's obvious. It'll be covered up.
Yeah.
Sorry to be cynical, but, I mean, somebody's got a bullet wound in their head and the gun's 60 feet away. Presumably you've shot yourself in the head and then tossed the gun away, as you do. And, it was suicide. These things have got to be pinned on the Scottish police and the political establishment.
Traditionally, what would happen in Scotland is, we've got some further information here. So we'll do a full and thorough reinvestigation. So that then takes a year, 18 months, and then after that, after consultation with independent Crown Counsel within the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, it has been decided that there's insufficient credible and admissible evidence to take the matter further. So you're 2 years down the line, it's buried. That's how it's done. I mean, we've seen these so often from Holly Gregg onwards. We can write the stuff ourselves.
Yeah. And David, this man, it is believed he was investigating politicians and paedophilia. That
was at least one of the suggestions, that there was, we don't know who he had or what he had on them, but it was something perhaps in that line, which would make sense. Yeah. So we will see if we get anything more on that. But as you say, Brian, we're not holding our breath for a full and thorough inquiry into a suspicious death in Scotland, because there wasn't one for Stephen Sutherland. There wasn't one for Sean Ritchie. And there wasn't one for Willie McRae.
Yeah.
So that's that story. Humza, your favourite politician.
Well, look, David, if you
don't
don't
mind,
mind,
about Humza?
Do you want to do Humza, or can we skip that one? Okay, whatever you want, we can do that. But
we can skip it. I don't mind. We can skip Humza.
Yeah.
We could do Humza. We could do Humza next week. There's no hurry.
Okay.
I would like to do Remembrance Sunday.
Yes,
bit.
Absolutely, yes. But did you want to do the Scottish education one?
Well, just briefly, it's one slide here, but a couple of comments I want to make. This is the report on the government's pronouncements. We don't know the purpose of the curriculum, say the SNP advisors. So the government advisors are responsible for, there's a thing in Scotland called the Curriculum for Excellence, which is, of course, a curriculum for abject failure, because government. Now, the interesting thing about this, there's a couple of interesting things about this. Firstly, the principles of the Curriculum for Excellence are actually quite good. It was to say that the education's too bureaucratic. It's not centred enough on the child. It's like applying one fixed set of approaches to children that vary. It's too restrictive on what teachers do, and it doesn't treat teachers as professionals. It should all be loosened up, right? So that was the starting point, that we've got principles, you pass the principles over to the professionals, you let them get on with it, which would work. That's not what happened, though. So the first thing that happened was the teachers complained because they'd been so long used to being told what to do. Not being told what to do was frightening. So what do you expect us to do? Secondly, the vagueness of the instructions, or the lack of instructions, was coupled with a dictatorial Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Schools, HMI, sort of inquisition into what the teachers were doing. So that generated the desire for a lot of paperwork in order to justify what they'd been doing. That was then fed back into the bureaucratic machine, which turned that into 70,000 pages of guidance. 70,000 pages of guidance went out to teachers on how to apply this. So the whole thing became a bureaucratic nightmare. With vast amounts of paperwork, less time actually teaching, and of course the result was collapse. Now, the government's response to this? Change the name. Curriculum for Excellence. Well, that's putting it a bit high. We'll change its name to Curriculum for Scotland, and that puts a tartan bow on it, that puts a saltire on it. We're good to go. We're not going to mention excellence anymore because that's just embarrassing. So, what you see here is even when good ideas are then fed into the bureaucratic machine, into the government machine, they are so morphed, crushed, distorted, not only by the government machine, but by everything it has spawned, by the professions, by the individuals, by their lack of confidence, by their lack of imagination, by their lack of personal courage, by their lack of belief in their own ideas, that it falls down into this bureaucratic mindset. It's quite Soviet in the way that it fails. I think it's an interesting subject matter.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Oh, well, Brian, you got any thoughts?
No, I'm going to pass. I'm going to pass on that one. I think we could talk for ages on it, and probably we will in the future, because obviously children are an important subject.
Okay, David, so let's move on to Remembrance Sunday then.
Right, so Remembrance Sunday. So the first slide I've got here, this is what we would all imagine a Remembrance Parade as being. This one is in Bletchley. Okay, so you have a community coming together, you've got young people, people with grey hair, you've got the military and all of its branches represented, you've got dignity, you've got quiet remembrance, you have all the things that would associate with it. But it's changing a little bit. So if you look at the next slide, the amazing Remembrance Sunday cascade returns to Scots Church. So the chap standing out here outside this church is Jackson Carlaw, former head of the Scottish Conservative and Unionist Party, and he's standing outside his church, and he's very proud that they've got 60-foot river of blood coming out the top of the church. That seems odd to me. And then we've got the National, the SNP's in-house fanzine. Stuart Cosgrove, remembrance is not about poppies, but the simple act of reflection. But he's then he's doing two things. He's politicizing it, and he's also making it an experience, like a
theme park,
like an arts exhibition, right? It's about how he feels. Right? It's about his not just emotional response, but his his response to the music and the events, and he's seeking some sort of fulfillment in the experience. It doesn't seem to go deeper than that. But he's also shown here the two kelpies, which represent demons, remember, illuminated blood red as an illustration of Remembrance Sunday. I start to feel very uneasy when I see things like that. And then I was in Perth on Saturday night, day before Remembrance Sunday, and I came across the St Paul's Church. Now, St Paul's Church has been derelict for some time, has been turned into an outdoor arts performance space. So it's now just the shell of a church, and I have here a little short video of it.
Well, keep talking because there's also no audio with this one. So,
All right, okay. So what we've got here is a projection on the walls inside and out this church of blood red lighting and poppies cascading down the wall of the church, and the whole thing is the colour of blood. And again, that struck me as deeply odd and troubling. And the reason that I found this troubling, I think, is partly because it's a church. So if you're talking about blood and sacrifice, you're talking about Jesus Christ, and this seems to be a desecration of the church. Secondly, you're talking about principally the First World War, which was the great tragedy of the 20th century, the great tragedy of this nation, and indeed the whole of Europe. And whilst we remember the fallen, and I remember my two grandfathers who served in that conflict, the painting buildings blood red seems to be inappropriate. Are we saying it was a sacrifice in the way that Christ sacrificed to create some sort of new world? Because the new world that it created was a more degenerate world, a less noble world, a more desperate world, a world where family and faith and security and community were in disarray. And are we saying that that was the result of a sacrifice? If so, it was a human sacrifice. It just seems off. I was wondering what you think of that, gentlemen.
right.
Well, my instant response, David, is that these things, these colour displays have been appearing all around the country, and I come back to this thing: they don't come out of nowhere. There's somebody that wants these things to happen, and they are done in a particular way. And if you stand back and look at the effect, they are pouring blood, and this cannot be right. So you then have to say, well, what is it? What is it these people have in their minds? And I think what we are starting to see is that people in control of policy have got some very dark agendas in their minds. While you were talking, I was trying to, just to refresh it myself, I was trying to get on the clip of Boris Johnson, who was somewhere like Trafalgar Square, I think, where there was a model of Ishtar Gate that was erected with great fanfare, and that also included very strange lighting. And my question at the time is, why is Boris Johnson getting so excited at this particular, we'll call it a piece of archaeology? And I came to the conclusion because, the trouble with people who are good or reasonably good, none of us perfect, the trouble with people certainly who are benign in their terms of faith is they look at other people and think they are similar. So the sheep look at the wolf and say, well, it's got to be another sheep. And I look at Boris Johnson, I do not know what's in that man's head, but my instinct says whatever it is very dark and dirty. And he's just one of a system. Bill Gates is in it as well. So why have we now got this perversion of remembrance? I think because it's being proper remembrance of people who've given their lives for the benefit of the wider community and their families. And we're now looking at people who are gloating because they regard it as a blood sacrifice. The reason I don't wear a poppy anymore is because probably about 3 or 4 years ago, I watched one of the remembrance ceremonies on TV, and the royal family were there and all of the military leaders. I think there were wives of some of the people who died in Afghanistan, possibly Iraq. And as I watched it, I got more and more uncomfortable because I thought to myself, these people are laughing and gloating at the dead. They're not actually in quiet, reflective memory of the sacrifice. So aside from the dirty political stuff we've got happening, I think that it is coming with a very dark belief system. And that belief system is certainly not Christianity. I don't even believe that it's Islam. It is something that's considerably worse than either of those two.
I've been spending a bit of time with lectures and studies of the origin of the First World War off and on, including over the weekend. The degree to which it shouldn't have happened, the degree to which it almost didn't happen, is really quite striking. The Germans wrote the Austrians a blank check. That I knew. What I didn't know is the Germans actually rescinded the blank check. They were about 12 hours too late. When they sussed out that Britain would defend Belgium, they told the Austrians to negotiate. And that was about 10 hours after the Austrians had started to shell Belgrade. When the Tsar mobilized the Russians, an hour later he rescinded the order because he thought there was a chance of a negotiated settlement. So there was, even at the very, 11th hour, 12th hour, 1 minute to midnight type stuff, there was a realization of what it meant and a willingness to draw back from the brink. And it so nearly didn't happen. And yet look what it did. Look what it did to the continent. Look what it did to this country. Look what it did to all those lives that were lost. And against that background, I look at the Poland and Russia related shenanigans from people like Elwood and General Sir Nick Carter, who was speaking today about we must be ready to take on Russia in a war, and all of the other merry men, and I'm incredulous. Have you learned nothing? Did all that sacrifice, did all that loss of life, did all that blood actually not matter to you? I had two grandfathers in it. One was, they both signed up in 1914. One was everywhere. He's in the infantry. He was in the Seaforth Highlanders. And he was everywhere. Somme, Ypres, Arras, the lot. And he was in all the way through. He came out, he was deaf when he came out with shells. A shell exploded nearby. But otherwise, he came through unhurt. The other grandfather was in the Royal Field Artillery. He was invalided out in about 1917. He didn't actually get out of hospital to 1919. That's how badly injured he was. And they both considered what they had done to be worth it. They didn't consider that they'd been engaged in a pointless exercise. The whole counter-narrative that's come up from the 20s and 30s on, lions led by donkeys and all this stuff, that's not how they saw it. But by here, they didn't want to be seeing either the country that they fought for surrendered to evil, nor did they want to see it all happen again, which it did, nor did they want to see the errors that led to it, the folly that led to it, run one more time 110 years into the future. I look at it and I'm profoundly disappointed. Even we don't expect. I mean, people in the UK call them, we do not expect much from our leaders. I've got a very low opinion of most of them. But I have to say, this week, with that stuff from Russia, they've disappointed me. Even against the lowest of low opinions, they have found a way of not quite shocking me, but certainly surprising me with their folly.
David,
Anyway,
David, I can't see comments at the moment because I can't get in the chat box because it's full. I'm guessing that we've probably hit our audience pretty hard today, and I also think probably it's time for us to end. So I'm going to throw into the mix. If you want to see the effect of people doing the right thing on each other, perhaps people would like to have a look at. There's 5 of them. 5 girls. They're singing Russian folk songs. They are actually in Germany, but it's labelled as a concert in Warsaw. So I'll just give people the title. If you go onto YouTube and you're going to put in Belloe, which is Beloe, Beloe, and then ZLATO, ZLATO, and look for concert in Warsaw. And for whatever reason, it's labelled that, but it appears to be in Germany. And have a look at the effect of that, of the interaction between the Russian girls and the German audience. And I think it'll uplift people.
Okay.
Well, I need to try and end on a positive note or two as well. So, firstly, the degree to which the government narrative is falling, and the degree to which each one of us can make a big difference in that, because they cannot answer questions, they cannot resist well-reasoned arguments, they cannot resist inquiry. They do not like being watched. If you watched all these auditors who go around and film outside police stations and things, the police often freak out because they do not like being watched. The simple act of watching them is devastating for their case. So action is ever more effective in this environment. And the other thing, just a little bit of news in today, Shell plans to move its headquarters for tax reasons from the Netherlands to the UK. Brexit's still beautiful.
Okay. Well, look, well done. Thank you both. I think we need to leave it there, if that's okay. And we will be back at, well, as we said, 1 p.m. on Wednesday. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.
Okay. Well done.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye-bye.